There's a strange moment in life that hits like a quiet thunderstorm. You're at a family dinner, or maybe a party with old friends, and suddenly it feels like you're speaking a different language. You nod, you smile, but something inside you whispers, "This isn't me." It's not arrogance, it's not rebellion, it's awareness. You're not crazy for feeling out of place. In fact, according to Friedrich Nietzsche, you might be the only sane person in the room. Nietzsche called this the free spirit, the person who has begun to see through the veil of herd morality. Most people don't question why they laugh at certain jokes, chase specific careers, or even follow moral rules. They've inherited beliefs like hand-me-down clothes and wear them without asking if they fit. But you notice the itch. That's not a flaw, that's a feature of awakening. There's even science behind it. Neuroscience shows that the brain lights up differently when someone experiences social rejection. It activates the same areas as physical pain. The brain is wired to seek belonging. But what happens when the tribe you were born into no longer feels like home? Enter the paradox of social pain. It hurts to stand apart, but it also hurts more to betray who you really are. That tension is the crucible where individuality is forged. Nietzsche's advice? Stop trying to blend in. He believed that those who never fit in were never supposed to. They are nature's rebellion against sameness. His concept of the Übermensch isn't about dominance, it's about transcendence, becoming your own moral lawgiver. It's not about escaping others, it's about outgrowing them. Modern psychology backs this up. Research from Dr. Mark Leary at Duke University shows that people with a stronger internal self-concept, those who define themselves based on inner values rather than external approval, are not only mentally healthier, but also more resilient. Emotional alchemy begins here, when rejection transforms into self-recognition. In this video, we'll unpack the strange, beautiful psychology of being different. We'll explore how loneliness can be a sign of mental evolution, how herd mentality forms, and how to build a personal value system that doesn't require a crowd's applause. And by the end, you'll realize, not fitting in isn't your weakness, it's your edge. Because what if the pain of not belonging is actually the proof that you've outgrown the illusion? The invisible cage of herd morality. Imagine being born into a room with tinted windows. Everyone inside tells you the sky is green, the sun is square, and you're lucky to be here. You grow up smiling, nodding, repeating what they say. But one day, you notice a crack in the glass, and outside that crack, the sky is blue. That's what herd morality feels like. The rules that govern us, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. Nietzsche warned that most people never question the morality they inherit. He called this slave morality, a system designed to keep individuals docile, obedient, and bound to the group's comfort. It thrives on guilt, shame, and obligation. Be like us, it says. Think like us. But what if your thoughts keep breaking formation? Cognitive psychology shows us how this happens. Daniel Kahneman's research on System 1 and System 2 thinking explains that most of our behavior is automatic, shaped by shortcuts and biases we rarely notice. Conformity becomes the path of least resistance. We follow the group because questioning it requires too much energy, and worse, emotional discomfort. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted his now famous conformity experiments. When placed in a group where everyone gave the wrong answer to a simple question, 75% of participants went along with the crowd, even when they knew the answer was wrong. Why? Because social rejection hurts more than being incorrect. The brain, especially the anterior cingulate cortex, reacts to exclusion as if it's under physical attack. That's not just emotional pain, it's neurological warfare. Nietzsche wasn't merely criticizing morality, he was diagnosing a psychological illness, what we now call groupthink. He believed that true authenticity comes not from defiance for its own sake, but from examining the roots of what we're told is good. He wrote, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. Let that settle. The instinct to belong can override your instinct to be real." This is where dark psychology intersects. Groups don't just passively shape behavior, they enforce it through fear, shame, and social conditioning. Cults, extremist movements, and even workplaces use the same psychological levers to maintain conformity. Robert Cialdini, in his classic book, Influence, breaks down how humans are manipulated through consistency, authority, and the desire to be liked. Most people comply because they don't even realize they're being controlled. But when you do see it, everything changes. The green sky turns blue. You stop asking how to fit in and start wondering why you wanted to in the first place. Nietzsche wasn't inviting you to be alone. He was inviting you to be free. And freedom, that begins where obedience ends. When loneliness means you're growing. Let's talk about that feeling no one wants to admit. The ache of not belonging. You walk into a room, try to smile, try to talk, but something inside you stiffens. It's not just shyness. It's a mismatch between who you are and what the room expects you to be. Most people interpret this as a flaw, but what if that discomfort is actually a sign of growth? Nietzsche saw loneliness not as a curse, but as a necessary passage. He wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." In other words, as your thinking becomes clearer, your circle may shrink. But that's not regression, it's refinement. Modern psychology supports this idea. Dr. John Cacioppo, a pioneer in social neuroscience, spent decades studying loneliness. His findings were paradoxical. While loneliness can be painful, it's also a signal. Like hunger tells us to eat, loneliness tells us we're disconnected from meaning, not just people. And that search for meaning often begins the moment we stop pretending to be someone we're not. Nietzsche's idea of the free spirit isn't someone who rebels for fun. It's someone who's painfully honest with themselves. And honesty, real honesty, often creates distance. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, a psychological rebirth where the individual breaks away from collective norms to forge a self that's real, not likable, not popular, but real. In this phase, creative loneliness becomes your ally. You begin to listen to your own thoughts without needing an audience. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, in his book Creativity, Flow and the Psychology of Discovery and Invention, observed that most groundbreaking thinkers spent long stretches in solitude. But it wasn't isolation, it was incubation. Their best ideas came when they stopped absorbing the noise of others. And here's the twist. When you stop trying to belong, you naturally start attracting people who match your frequency. That's not magic. It's psychology. The false self is magnetic to the wrong crowd. The true self, it repels the wrong ones and reveals the right ones. There's even neurological evidence. The brain's default mode network, which activates during solitude and self-reflection, is responsible for internal dialogue and identity formation. When you're alone, you're not wasting time. You're wiring yourself for clarity. So if you feel like you don't fit in, stop trying to. That discomfort you're feeling, it might be your nervous system waking up to the truth that you've outgrown the space around you. Loneliness, in this context, isn't emptiness. It's a clearing for something better to arrive. The brain wasn't built for authenticity. Here's a brutal truth. Your brain doesn't care if you're authentic. It cares if you're accepted. From an evolutionary standpoint, authenticity was never the goal. Survival was. And survival meant belonging. For most of human history, rejection from the tribe equaled death. So your nervous system evolved to equate social disapproval with existential threat. That's why you hesitate before speaking your truth. That's why you flinch at being too different. Your biology is trying to save you from a danger that no longer exists. This is where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes radical. He challenged this survival script. To him, the highest form of life wasn't the one that conformed, it was the one that transcended. The free spirit, as he described, is someone who rewrites their instincts rather than obeying them blindly. But to do this, you first have to understand just how deeply conformity is wired into your body. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman found that the brain's dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and anterior insula, regions associated with physical pain, are also activated during social exclusion. In other words, not fitting in literally hurts. It's not just psychological, it's biological. The pain you feel when you're ignored or criticized isn't weakness, it's your ancient wiring trying to drag you back into the herd. But Nietzsche believed we could override this. He called it the will to power, not domination over others, but mastery over the self. It's the internal force that lets you feel the fear and still speak your truth. It's not about being fearless, it's about being willing. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, believed the fully functioning person lives in a state of congruence, a match between inner experience and outer expression. But he also admitted it's rare. Most people bend their words, their tone, even their emotions to avoid judgment. And the cost is heavy: anxiety, depression, a gnawing sense of inauthenticity. In his book, The Neuroscience of You, Chantal Prade explains how each person's brain is wired uniquely, yet most people are forced to suppress that individuality to avoid friction. This creates chronic internal conflict. The remedy? Not forcing yourself to fit, but creating an environment where your natural wiring isn't punished. Nietzsche would say, "Don't fix the discomfort, follow it." It's pointing to the walls you've outgrown, that edge you feel when you say something unpopular, that tremble before you show your real self. That's the exact place where freedom begins. So next time your brain screams, "They won't like this," whisper back, "Good." Herd mentality isn't harmless. It's hypnosis. Ever been in a crowd that started chanting, cheering, or even rioting, and felt yourself pulled into the current, even if your instincts told you something was off? That's not weakness. That's herd mentality, and it's one of the most powerful psychological forces ever studied. But Nietzsche warned that when you lose yourself in the crowd, you lose the right to call your life your own. He called it herd morality, a structure that rewards safety, sameness, and blind loyalty. But underneath, it's not morality at all. It's a survival reflex pretending to be virtue. And the scariest part? It feels good. There's a dopamine hit in being approved, liked, retweeted, praised, and your brain learns fast. If applause comes when you betray yourself, you'll soon do it without thinking. Behavioral psychology helps us understand how this works. B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning showed that humans quickly adapt behaviors that earn positive reinforcement. When society rewards conformity and punishes independence, most people choose the path of least resistance. They call it growing up. Nietzsche called it spiritual shrinking. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1960s revealed a horrifying truth. Ordinary people would deliver lethal shocks to others simply because an authority figure told them to. Most participants weren't evil, they were simply unable to break from the script. This is the same mechanism that powers cults, systemic corruption, and online cancel mobs. It's not about thought, it's about obedience. In his book, Ordinary Men, Christopher Browning details how average German police officers participated in mass killings, not out of hatred, but out of pressure to conform. This isn't just history, it's a warning. Herd mentality doesn't just dull your individuality, it can erase your conscience. Nietzsche's solution? Become your own authority. Design your own values. He urged people to stop mimicking goodness and start questioning where that definition came from. Is it good because it's true, or because it's convenient for the crowd? Cognitive neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making and moral judgment, can be hijacked by peer pressure. When everyone around you is thinking one way, your brain literally suppresses conflicting thoughts. That's not a theory. That's measurable. Your sense of truth bends under social weight. But the antidote is awareness. When you realize the hypnosis, the spell breaks. You stop needing permission to think. You stop shrinking in conversations. You stop nodding just to keep the peace. And slowly, your nervous system stops trembling at the idea of standing alone. Because sometimes the clearest mind is the one furthest from the crowd. Your uniqueness is a threat, and that's exactly why it matters. Ever noticed how some people get uncomfortable when you change? When you stop gossiping, stop agreeing, stop doing what's normal? It's not always malice, it's often fear. Because when you shift, it forces others to confront the parts of themselves they've ignored, and that's uncomfortable. You becoming more, you threatens the illusion they're still trying to protect. Nietzsche knew this all too well. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." He wasn't being poetic. He was describing a psychological reality that modern research confirms. People who live authentically often face resistance not because they're wrong, but because they make others question the script. This is where developmental psychology and personality theory collide. Carl Jung believed every person is born with a unique blueprint, a self, buried beneath years of conditioning. He called this the process of individuation. But unlike social development, individuation doesn't earn you applause. It earns you silence, confusion, and sometimes even rejection. In her research on authenticity, psychologist Dr. Brené Brown found that people fear being too much or not enough when they act in alignment with their true values. That's the paradox. The more aligned you are with yourself, the more misaligned you may become with others. But Nietzsche argued that this isn't a flaw, it's a function. The goal isn't to be accepted by the crowd, it's to become the type of person who doesn't need them. In The Courage to be Disliked, authors Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga build on the ideas of Alfred Adler, highlighting how interpersonal freedom comes when you separate your task from others' expectations. You stop trying to manage people's reactions. You live your values, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Cognitive neuroscience adds another layer. Research shows that novel thinking, ideas that break from the norm, activates the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, a region associated with error detection and conflict. Your brain literally flags uniqueness as a potential problem. But those who persist despite that signal build a stronger internal self-narrative. They become anti-fragile, not just surviving discomfort, but growing from it. So when you speak differently, think differently, or even dress differently, and the world pulls back, that's not rejection, that's confirmation. You've stepped out of the mirror maze. You're no longer reflecting them, you're revealing yourself. And nothing scares a conditioned mind more than someone who doesn't need to be liked to feel alive. Why rejection is a psychological mirror. Rejection hurts, that's obvious. But what if rejection is also revealing something deeper, something about who you are, what you value, and where your path truly begins? Nietzsche believed rejection wasn't just something to survive, it was something to study, because the way others reject you often says more about them than it does about you. But how you respond, that says everything about your psychological growth. In modern psychology, social rejection is more than just emotional discomfort. Dr. Naomi Eisenberger's work at UCLA has shown that the brain processes rejection using the same neural circuitry as physical pain. Specifically, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula light up when we experience exclusion. So when you say it hurts to be ignored or left out, that's not metaphor. It's measurable biology. But here's what Nietzsche would challenge you with. What if that pain is useful? What if rejection is the psyche's signal that you've stopped performing and started becoming? This idea mirrors Viktor Frankl's principle in Man's Search for Meaning, that suffering, when met with awareness, becomes a doorway to transformation. Rejection strips away the distractions. It forces you to ask, who am I when no one claps, when no one agrees, when there's no crowd to validate me? Nietzsche's will to power wasn't about control, it was about authorship. The ability to shape your life from within rather than being shaped by approval from without. When you're rejected for your values, your voice, or your choices, you're being handed a strange gift, the chance to love yourself without external proof. Social psychology backs this up. In a famous experiment by Mark Leary and colleagues, participants who were excluded in a group task rated themselves as less valuable, but those with strong internal self-concepts were far less affected. Why? Because their self-worth wasn't rented, it was owned. In The Fear of Rejection, author Scott Allen explains that people who learn to use rejection as a compass, not a verdict, develop a kind of internal GPS. They stop treating no as a wall and start seeing it as a signpost, a redirection, not a defeat. Nietzsche would say that if your truth offends the group, it's not your truth that needs to change, it's your group. Rejection isn't failure, it's friction, and friction creates heat. And heat, that's what forges identity. So the next time someone pulls away, ask yourself, is this loss or is this alignment? Because when the wrong people reject you, it just might mean you're finally becoming the right version of you. The war between belonging and becoming. There's a quiet tug-of-war happening inside most people. On one side, the need to belong, to feel accepted, seen, and safe in the arms of the familiar. On the other, the urge to become, to evolve into someone different, someone real, someone they haven't yet been. Nietzsche saw this tension not as a conflict to solve, but as a choice to face. You can't serve both, and sooner or later, Life will make you choose. Modern psychology echoes this in Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. In adolescence and early adulthood, we face a critical dilemma: identity versus role confusion. Belonging means playing roles, fitting in with the crowd, keeping opinions safe, mirroring what's popular. But becoming, that requires letting those roles dissolve. It means becoming so committed to your internal voice that you risk external silence. Nietzsche described this moment as self-overcoming, a kind of psychological shedding where the old self, the social self, must be let go in order to create something truly authentic. He didn't romanticize it. He knew it was brutal. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, he said. That why becomes your inner compass when belonging fades. Neuroscience offers a fascinating insight here. The brain's reward system, primarily governed by dopamine, is highly responsive to social approval. Every like, every nod, every compliment, micro hits of dopamine. But there's another system at play, the prefrontal cortex, where reflection, long-term planning, and personal values live. The more you activate this region through journaling, meditation, solitude, the more your life becomes guided by meaning rather than feedback. In The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield explores the internal resistance we feel when trying to step into a more authentic version of ourselves. That resistance isn't random. It's the voice of the false self begging you to return to what's safe, to stay small, to not stand out. And the more powerful your potential, the louder that resistance will become. Social psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on self-regulation shows that people who are able to delay gratification, who can resist the need for immediate approval, tend to live with greater life satisfaction. Why? Because they're not living for today's applause. They're building for something larger, something lasting. Nietzsche's ultimate call was this: stop asking where you fit and start asking what you are becoming. Belonging will always be tempting. It will dress itself up as love, loyalty, even kindness. But if it demands that you betray your own truth, it's not belonging, it's bondage. And when you finally choose becoming over belonging, the world may not understand you, but you'll finally begin to understand yourself. The illusion of normal and the power of audacity. Let's talk about the word normal. We treat it like a benchmark, something to strive for, something to maintain. But Nietzsche would call that a trap. Normal isn't neutral, it's an invention, a story crafted by the many to keep the few in check. And the danger, the moment you believe in normal, you begin to doubt everything extraordinary about yourself. This isn't just philosophy, it's psychology. In social theory, the concept of normative behavior refers to actions that align with group expectations. The problem is, those norms often reward predictability over principle. Say the right thing, dress the right way, feel the right feelings. But what if your instincts don't align? This is where the work of Erich Fromm becomes especially relevant. In Escape from Freedom, he argues that people often fear the responsibility that comes with true freedom. So instead, they retreat into conformity. Not because it's better, but because it's easier. Nietzsche saw this same dynamic, a quiet war between comfort and courage. Most people surrender before they even know a war is happening. The science backs it. Research by Dr. Gregory Burns at Emory University shows that group opinion can actually alter perception in the brain, not just influence, but biologically change what people see. That's not groupthink, that's group vision. The herd doesn't just change how you act, it rewires how you interpret reality itself. So what happens when someone refuses to bend? When someone dares to speak a sentence no one else will say, or walk a road no one else has touched? They're not just rejected, they're labeled dangerous, rebellious, disruptive. But these are the very words used to describe every iconoclast who's ever pushed the human story forward. Nietzsche respected this audacity, not in the arrogant sense, but in the raw, trembling sense of risking everything to be real. The kind of courage it takes to contradict a culture, even when your voice shakes. He believed that the individual who walks away from the crowd doesn't vanish, they become visible. In Originals, organizational psychologist Adam Grant explores how nonconformists shape the world, not by being fearless, but by choosing to act despite fear. They question the default, they resist the algorithm, they understand that normal is often just outdated consensus wrapped in politeness. When you stop chasing normal, you stop apologizing for being strange, quiet, intense, curious, emotional, or bold. You stop seeking mirrors and start becoming a light. Because fitting in might make you feel safe, but it will never make you feel whole. And wholeness? That requires the audacity to be your entire self, even when the world stares in silence. The science of thinking differently and why it hurts. There's a hidden cost to thinking for yourself. Most people don't talk about it. They celebrate originality as if it's easy, as if it's just about being true to who you are. But anyone who's ever questioned a belief system, walked away from a tradition, or simply asked, "Why do we do it this way?" knows originality is expensive, not just socially, biologically. Nietzsche understood this before neuroscience could prove it. He saw that thinking differently doesn't just isolate you, it exposes you. It strips away the comfort of being surrounded by shared delusions. It demands you face life with no blueprint, no guarantee, and no crowd to fall back on. Today, cognitive neuroscience confirms what Nietzsche intuited. When you go against consensus, when you question something everyone else accepts, the brain's anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex light up. These are the regions associated with anxiety, uncertainty, and social error detection. Translation: your brain punishes you for thinking differently. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're crossing a threshold your nervous system doesn't yet recognize as safe. And that's where growth lives. Jean Piaget, the developmental psychologist who mapped out stages of cognitive development, explained that true learning occurs through accommodation, when our mental frameworks are forced to shift because new information no longer fits. That's not just learning, it's unlearning. And unlearning is uncomfortable. Nietzsche described this psychological tension as the birth of tragedy. The moment when beauty and pain collide, when seeing the truth fractures your old world. But he didn't want you to run from it. He wanted you to stare it down and grow from the break. This kind of self-reconstruction is what Daniel Kahneman calls slow thinking, the deliberate, effortful processing that overrides the brain's lazy, fast assumptions. But most people avoid it. Why? Because fast thinking feels good. It confirms our biases. It soothes our fears. But slow thinking, that's where transformation happens. In The Master and His Emissary, psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist explores the idea that our brain hemispheres are constantly at war, one seeking certainty and control, the other embracing ambiguity and possibility. And those who create, who question, who disrupt, often operate from that second hemisphere. They're more comfortable in the unknown, but that comfort comes with a cost: misunderstanding, mockery, and exile. Nietzsche called these people the creators, those who risk madness to bring something new into being. And while their path is harder, it's also more alive. Because once you've learned to think differently, you can never unsee what you've seen. And even if it hurts, even if it costs you approval or peace, you'll know it's real. Becoming the lawgiver of your own life. There's a moment when everything breaks. Your routines, your friendships, maybe even your belief system. It's not just crisis. It's the collapse of inherited identity. Nietzsche didn't fear this moment. He saw it as the beginning of something sacred, the birth of your inner lawgiver. The point at which you stop being shaped by external forces and begin shaping yourself. This is more than personal growth. It's psychological revolution. Nietzsche wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." He wasn't talking about politics. He was talking about people. The vast majority obey thoughts that aren't even theirs. They quote ideas without questioning them. They live values they never chose. But once you recognize that, you're no longer just a participant. You become the author. Carl Jung described this transition through the lens of individuation, the psychological process of integrating your unconscious shadow into conscious awareness. The result isn't perfection, it's wholeness. You start to see your impulses, your darkness, your fears, not as enemies, but as clues. You begin to choose rather than react. From a neuroscience angle, this kind of self-authorship lights up the prefrontal cortex and strengthens the brain's executive control network. According to Dr. Andrew Huberman, sustained self-reflection rewires the way you process future decisions, making you less reactive and more internally anchored. This is not self-help, it's neuroplasticity. In On Becoming a Person, Carl Rogers noted that people living most authentically are those who don't look to others for permission. Their morality doesn't come from rules, it emerges from lived experience. And that makes them dangerous in the best possible way, not because they harm others, but because they can't be manipulated. They no longer need the herd to feel valid. Nietzsche believed these people were rare because self-overcoming is hard. It demands that you look at your own life and say, if I had to live this again and again for eternity, would I still choose it? That's the thought experiment behind his concept of eternal recurrence. Not a literal belief, but a challenge. Are you living a life worth repeating? Once you begin to design your own values, something subtle but powerful happens. The world loses its hold on you. You stop needing to be understood. You stop fearing contradiction. You stop chasing titles and applause. You start living by something far more intimate, your own internal compass. And ironically, that's when true belonging becomes possible. Not the fake belonging that comes from fitting in, but the real kind that comes when people are drawn to your clarity, not your conformity. Because when you become the lawgiver of your own life, you stop asking for directions. You are the map. The gift of being unfit for the world. Here's the part no one tells you. Fitting in is often just a slow form of dying. Not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual one. It's the death of instinct, the erosion of originality, the quiet suffocation of that voice inside you that once asked why before it was taught to say yes. Nietzsche didn't pity those who never fit in. He honored them, because he understood that to not belong in a broken world isn't failure, it's evidence of life. You've probably felt it. That inner resistance when you try to go along with something everyone else seems fine with. The forced smiles, the small talk, the subtle pressure to dilute your convictions so no one feels uncomfortable. But the discomfort isn't the problem. The betrayal of self is. Nietzsche would argue that this alienation you feel is not a mistake. It's an evolutionary push, not towards the herd, but away from it. Away from inherited morality. Away from performative belonging. And towards something real, psychological freedom. Psychologist Abraham Maslow placed self-actualization at the top of his hierarchy of needs, not because it's more important than food or shelter, but because it makes everything else meaningful. And here's the twist. Most people never reach it, not because they can't, but because they're too busy trying to be someone they're not. In The Myth of Normal, Dr. Gabor Mate exposes how the modern world punishes sensitivity, creativity, and depth, treating them like disorders instead of gifts. But the ones labeled too emotional, too intense, too weird, they're often the ones seeing things clearly, not through the lens of culture but through the lens of conscience. And when you finally stop editing yourself to fit the room, something radical happens. You begin to attract spaces that don't ask you to shrink, people who don't flinch when you speak your mind, paths that feel less like survival and more like resonance. This journey won't hand you comfort, but it will hand you something better: sovereignty, the power to look at your life and say, this is mine, the courage to walk into rooms that don't reflect you and still hold your posture, the clarity to know that not fitting in is sometimes the first sign that you're finally standing where you were always meant to be. Nietzsche never promised it would be easy, he only promised it would be real. And sometimes, being real is the most rebellious, most healing thing you can be. You weren't built to fit in, you were built to wake up and walk alone until others who see clearly find you, and they will.